Nobody saw it coming. Not the crowd, not the cameras, not even the alien itself. 1 second, everything was normal. The next second, history changed forever. It happened in the middle of a busy public square. Thousands of people were watching. Aliens and humans stood side by side. The world had changed. First contact was old news. Humans and alien species had been sharing the same streets for almost 3 years now. But nobody, absolutely nobody, was ready for what happened next. An alien warrior, 7 feet tall, covered in dark armor, walked straight up to a United States Marine. This alien was not small. It was not weak. It came from a species that had conquered 12 star systems. A species that had never lost a fight. A species that looked at humans the way humans look at ants. And it slapped her. Right there, in public. In front of everyone. The crowd went silent. Then it was over in 3 seconds. 3 seconds. What happened in those 3 seconds will change the way you think about human beings forever. What happened in those 3 seconds sent a message across the entire galaxy. And what happened in those 3 seconds is something that alien civilization has never forgotten. Not even to this day. But here is the part nobody talks about. That Marine? She was not supposed to be there. She was not on duty. She was not carrying her full gear. She was just walking home. And she still ended it in 3 seconds. Today, on Hi-Fi Sci-Fi, we are going to tell you the full story. Every detail, every moment, every shocking twist that the mainstream channels left out. We are going to show you what really happened before the slap. We are going to show you what happened during those 3 seconds. We are going to show you what happened after, when the alien government demanded answers. And we are going to show you the one final twist that nobody saw coming. The twist that changed the relationship between humans and aliens forever. Stay with us, because this story, it starts way before that public square. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Her name was Sergeant Elena Vasquez. She was 26 years old. She stood 5 feet 7 inches tall. She weighed 142 pounds. She had dark brown eyes, a sharp jaw, and a small scar above her left eyebrow from a training accident 3 years ago. She kept her hair pulled back tight. Always. Even on her days off. Elena was not the biggest Marine in her unit. She was not the loudest. She was not the one who told war stories at the bar or bragged about her scores on the firing range. She was quiet. She was focused. And she was, according to every commanding officer who had ever worked with her, one of the most dangerous human beings alive. She had grown up in a small town in Texas. Her father was a mechanic. Her mother worked at the local school. They were not rich. They were not connected. They were just regular people who worked hard and expected their kids to do the same. Elena had 2 brothers, both older, both bigger. Growing up with them meant learning fast. It meant learning how to take a hit and get back up. It meant learning that the world did not slow down for you just because you were tired or scared or hurting. She joined the Marines at 18. Not because someone told her to. Not because she had no other options. She joined because she wanted to. Because something inside her needed it. Because she had watched the news her whole life and seen a world that was getting harder and stranger and more dangerous, and she had decided, quietly, firmly, without drama, that she was going to be one of the people who stood between the danger and everyone else. Basic training was hard. It was supposed to be hard. Elena did not complain. She did not quit. She finished in the top 5% of her class. Her instructors noticed. They pushed her harder. She pushed back harder. By the time she was 21, she had completed advanced combat training, close quarters battle certification, and a specialized program that only 12 Marines in her entire battalion had qualified for. That program had a long official name that nobody used. Everyone just called it the Edge program. The Edge program was not about weapons. It was not about tactics or strategy or battlefield communication. It was about the human body itself. About what the human body could do when it was trained past every limit it thought it had. About reaction time. About pain tolerance. about the ability to make a perfect decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The instructors in the EDGE program had a saying. They said it on the first day, and they said it on the last day, and they said it every day in between. The saying was this: your enemy will always be bigger than you think. Your window will always be smaller than you think. And you will always be more capable than you think. Elena had heard that saying so many times that it lived in her bones. By the time she was 24, she had done 2 tours. She had seen things that most people would never see. She had been in situations that most people could not imagine. She had come home both times. Not because she was lucky. Because she was prepared. Because she was precise. Because when the moment came, she did not hesitate. Now she was 26. She was stationed at a joint human-alien coordination base just outside of London, England. The base was one of 17 such facilities that had been established after the Accord of New Geneva, the historic agreement signed 3 years ago that officially recognized the presence of 3 alien species on Earth and established rules for coexistence. The 3 species were the Vorkai, the Sathani, and the Dreth. The Vorkai were tall, thin, and pale. They were scientists and diplomats. They were the ones who had made first contact. They were careful and precise, and they communicated in a way that felt almost too formal, like every sentence had been reviewed by a committee before it was spoken. The Sathani were smaller, quieter, and harder to read. They kept to themselves mostly. They had agreed to the accord, but they had not been enthusiastic about it. They watched humans with an expression that nobody could quite interpret. Not hostile. Not friendly. Just watching. And then there were the Dreth. The Dreth were different. The Dreth were warriors. They had always been warriors. Their entire civilization, their history, their culture, their religion, everything was built around the concept of strength. To the Dreth, strength was not just a physical quality. It was a moral quality. It was the highest virtue. A being that was strong was a being that deserved respect. A being that was weak was a being that deserved nothing. The Dreth had conquered 12 star systems over 400 years. Not through diplomacy, not through trade, through force, through combat. Through the simple, brutal logic that if you were strong enough to take something, it was yours. They had agreed to the accord not because they believed in peace. They had agreed because the Vorkai had convinced them that Earth was not worth the cost of a full military campaign. Humans were primitive, the Vorkai had argued. They were young. They were disorganized. They posed no real threat. Let them exist. Let them be useful. There was no glory in crushing something that could not fight back. The Dreth had accepted this argument. Reluctantly. But they had never stopped looking at humans the way a predator looks at something small and slow. The Dreth warrior who walked into that public square in London on a Tuesday afternoon in October was named Corax. He was a mid-ranking soldier in the Dreth hierarchy, which still made him more powerful and more dangerous than almost anything a human being had ever faced. He stood 7 feet 2 inches tall. His skin was dark and textured like old stone. His armor was black and gold. The colors of his house, his family line, his military rank. He wore a red cape that moved behind him like a slow fire. Corax had been on Earth for 6 weeks. He had been assigned to the London coordination base as part of a cultural exchange program, which was a polite way of saying that the Dreth High Command had sent him to observe humans up close and report back on whether they were as weak as the Vorkai claimed. In 6 weeks, Corax had formed his opinion. Yes, they were weak. He had watched them in their markets and their streets and their offices. He had watched them argue over small things. He had watched them get tired after short distances. He had watched them flinch at loud noises. He had watched their soldiers, the ones who were supposed to be their best, their strongest, their most dangerous, and he had felt nothing but a quiet, deep contempt. These were not warriors. These were children playing at war. On that Tuesday afternoon, Corax was walking through the public square near the coordination base. It was a busy place. Humans and aliens moved through it every day. There were market stalls and benches, and a large fountain in the center. The sky was gray the way London skies are always gray, heavy and low and pressing down on everything. Elena was walking through the same square. She was off duty. She was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray jacket, boots. Her dog tags were under her shirt. She had her hair down, which was unusual for her, but it was her day off and she had decided for once to just be a person walking through a city instead of a Marine walking through a base. She was thinking about calling her mother. She had not called in 2 weeks and she knew her mother would be worried. She was thinking about what to have for dinner. She was thinking about a book she had been reading, a history of the Roman legions, which she found genuinely interesting in a way that most people in her life did not understand. She was not thinking about Korax. Korax was thinking about her. He had noticed her from across the square, not because she was remarkable, because she was wearing a jacket with a small American flag pin on the collar, a military pin. He had learned to recognize them. It meant she was a soldier, one of their soldiers, one of the ones they called Marines. He had heard about Marines. The humans talked about them with a reverence that Korax found almost amusing, as if calling something a Marine made it dangerous, as if a title could substitute for actual strength. He decided to test the theory. He walked toward her, directly, without slowing down. In Dreth culture, walking directly at someone without yielding was a statement. It meant, I do not move for you. It meant, you are beneath me. It meant, if you have any sense, you will step aside. Elena saw him coming. She recognized the body language. She had been briefed on Dreth customs. She knew what the direct walk meant. She did not step aside. She kept her pace steady and moved slightly to the right, not yielding, just navigating, the way you navigate around any obstacle in a crowded space. Korax stopped directly in front of her. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Korax raised his hand, open palm, and he slapped her across the face. Not hard enough to kill, not even hard enough to knock her down. It was a dismissive slap. The kind you give to something you want to remind of its place. The kind that says, you are nothing. The kind that says, I can touch you whenever I want and there is nothing you can do about it. The crowd froze. Elena's head moved with the impact. Her hair swung. A small cut opened on her cheekbone where one of his knuckles had caught the skin. A single drop of blood appeared. Korax was already turning away. He had made his point. He had demonstrated, publicly in front of witnesses, that a Dreth warrior could touch a human Marine and walk away without consequence. He had proven what he already believed. He had confirmed what he had come to Earth to confirm. Humans were weak. He took one step away. That was his mistake, because Elena Vasquez had not moved. She had not cried. She had not called for help. She had not reached for a weapon she was not carrying. She had simply reset. In the Edge program, they had a word for it. They called it the reset. It was the half-second after impact, after pain, after shock, where most people froze and a trained Marine did not, where most people's brains were still processing what had just happened, and a trained Marine's brain had already moved to what happened next. Elena reset. And then the 3 seconds began. The first second was about position. Elena did not lunge. She did not scream. She did not telegraph anything. She simply moved. One step, precise and quiet, closing the distance between herself and Korax before he had completed his first step away. In close quarters combat, distance is everything. Distance is the difference between a threat and a non-threat. Distance is the difference between someone who can hurt you and someone who cannot. Korax was big. He was strong. He had reach that Elena could not match. But reach only matters when there is space to use it. Elena took away the space. She was inside his reach before he knew she had moved. The second was about leverage. This is the part that people who were not trained fighters never understood. They watched the footage later, and they could not figure out how it happened. How did someone who weighed 142 pounds put a 7-foot alien warrior on the ground? How did that work? What was the physics of it? The answer was leverage, and timing, and the precise application of force to the exact right point at the exact right moment. Elena had trained for thousands of hours in close quarters combat. She had trained against opponents bigger than her. Much bigger. Her instructors had made sure of that. Because the real world did not sort opponents by size. The real world sent you whatever it sent you, and you had to be ready. She knew exactly where the leverage points were on a humanoid body. She had studied Dreth anatomy in her briefings. Not in detail, but enough. Enough to know that despite the armor, despite the size, despite the stone-like skin, the fundamental mechanics were similar. Joint angles, weight distribution, center of gravity. She found his center of gravity in the first second. She attacked it in the second second. Her right hand went to his wrist. Her left hand went to his elbow. She turned her body, using her entire weight and momentum, not just her arms, her whole body, rotating like a gear, and she applied force in the one direction that his size and his armor could not protect against. Down. Korax went down. Not slowly, not gracefully. He went down the way a tree goes down when the base is cut. Fast, heavy, final. The sound when he hit the ground was enormous. The stone tiles of the square cracked under the impact. The crowd, which had been frozen in silence, made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a scream. It was something in between. Something that had no name. The third second was about the message. Elena did not stop when Korax hit the ground. She followed him down. She was on top of him before he had finished falling. Her knee was on his chest. Her right hand had his wrist locked in a position that, if she applied any more pressure, would end his ability to use that arm. Her left hand was at his throat, not squeezing, just resting, just present, just saying, I am here, I am in control, and I can end this whenever I choose. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. His eyes were wide. In 600 years of Dreth military history, no record existed of a Dreth warrior being put on the ground by a human being. No record existed of a Dreth warrior being put on the ground by anything smaller than a Dreth warrior. The concept was not just surprising, it was, to Korax, in that moment, genuinely incomprehensible. He did not understand what had just happened. Elena held the position for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to be clear, long enough to be undeniable, long enough for every camera in that square, and there were many cameras, to capture every detail. Then she stood up. She straightened her jacket. She pushed her hair back from her face. She looked at the cut on her cheekbone, touched it once with 2 fingers, looked at the small amount of blood on her fingertips, and then looked back down at Korax. She said 4 words. 4 words, quiet and flat and completely without anger, which somehow made them more powerful than any shout could have been. She said, "Don't touch me again." Then she walked away. She did not run. She did not look back. She walked at the same pace she had been walking before any of this happened, steady and calm, as if she had simply stepped around a puddle on the pavement and continued on her way. The square was completely silent. Korax lay on the cracked tiles for a long moment. Then, slowly, he sat up. His armor was scratched. His cape was twisted beneath him. He looked at his wrist, the one she had locked, and he flexed his fingers slowly, testing them. Around him, the crowd began to move again. Slowly at first. Then faster. People were talking. People were pulling out their phones. People were looking at each other with expressions that mixed shock and disbelief, and something else. Something that was harder to name but felt very much like pride. One of the Vorkai diplomats who had been present in the square moved quickly to Korax's side and helped him to his feet. The Vorkai diplomat was speaking in a low, urgent voice, in Dreth, too quiet for the humans nearby to hear. But the expression on the diplomat's face was clear enough. It was the expression of someone who had just watched a very bad situation become a potentially catastrophic one, and was trying very hard to contain the damage. Korax said nothing. He stood up. He straightened his armor. He looked in the direction Elena had walked, though she was already gone, already around a corner, already out of sight. His expression was unreadable, but something had changed in his eyes, something that had not been there before. The footage was online within 20 minutes. Within an hour it had been viewed 4 million times. Within 6 hours, it had been viewed 40 million times. By the end of the day, it was the most watched video on every platform in every country on Earth. The comments were overwhelming. Humans from every nation, every background, every language, posting the same basic message in 1,000 different ways. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. Do not touch us. But while the internet celebrated, in a secure conference room on the 14th floor of the London Coordination Base, a very different conversation was happening. A conversation that would determine whether what Elena Vasquez had done in 3 seconds would lead to peace or to war. The meeting started at 9 o'clock that evening. The room was small and deliberately plain. White walls. A long table. Chairs on both sides. No windows. The kind of room designed to make everyone in it feel equally uncomfortable. Which was, according to the diplomats who had designed it, the point. On one side of the table sat 3 humans. General Marcus Webb, the commanding officer of the London Coordination Base, a man with 30 years of military service, and the kind of face that had stopped showing emotion sometime around his 2nd decade in uniform. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief diplomatic liaison for the Joint Human-Alien Program, who had spent 15 years studying alien cultures and spoke 4 alien languages with varying degrees of fluency, and Colonel James Hartley, Elena's direct superior officer, who had been pulled out of a dinner with his family and had arrived still wearing civilian clothes, which he clearly found deeply uncomfortable. On the other side of the table sat 2 Dreth, not Corax. Corax was not senior enough for this meeting. The 2 Dreth who sat across from the humans were High Commander Veth and his aide, a younger Dreth named Sorak, who took notes and said nothing. High Commander Veth was old, by Dreth standards. His skin was darker than Corax's, almost black, and it had the texture of something ancient and very hard. He had fought in 7 military campaigns across 3 star systems. He had personally ended the lives of more opponents than anyone in the room wanted to think about. He was, by any measure, one of the most dangerous beings on the planet. He sat very still. He had been sitting very still since he arrived. He had not spoken yet. He was waiting. General Webb opened the meeting. He said that the incident in the public square was regrettable. He said that Sergeant Vasquez had acted outside of her official capacity, and that her actions did not represent official military policy. He said that the human government was committed to the accord and to the ongoing process of peaceful coexistence. He said all of this in a careful, measured tone that gave nothing away. High Commander Veth listened to all of it without moving. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, not loud. Deep. The kind of deep that you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. He spoke in Dreth, and Dr. Chen translated quietly, her voice low and precise. He said, a Dreth warrior was put on the ground by a human female. In public. In front of witnesses. In front of recording devices. He paused. He said, this requires a response. General Webb said, we understand your concern. We are prepared to discuss appropriate measures to address the situation. High Commander Veth said, I am not speaking of measures. I am speaking of honor. The room was very quiet. Dr. Chen translated carefully, making sure every word was exact. High Commander Veth continued. He said that in Dreth culture, when a warrior was defeated in public, one of 2 things had to happen. Either the warrior who had been defeated had to challenge the one who defeated them and reclaim their honor through combat, or the warrior who had been defeated had to formally acknowledge the superior strength of the one who defeated them, which in Dreth culture was not a humiliation, but a recognition of reality. He said that Corax had requested permission to issue a formal challenge to Sergeant Vasquez. Colonel Hartley, who had been silent until this point, said, absolutely not. General Webb put a hand on Hartley's arm. Quietly. A small gesture that meant, let me handle this. General Webb said, we appreciate you sharing the cultural context. We will need time to consider the appropriate response. High Commander Veth looked at General Webb for a long moment. Then he said something that Dr. Chen translated very carefully, making sure she had it exactly right before she spoke. He said, I have been on this planet for 3 years. I have watched your people, I have formed opinions about your people. Some of those opinions I will keep to myself. But I will tell you one thing that I have observed. One thing that I did not expect when I came here." He paused again. The pause was long enough to be uncomfortable. He said, "Your female soldier. The one who put Korax on the ground. She did not hesitate. She did not calculate. She did not ask for permission or wait for orders. She simply acted. With complete precision. With complete control. And then she walked away." Another pause. He said, "In 30 years of military service, I have met perhaps 12 beings in the entire galaxy who could have done what she did. 12. In the entire galaxy." The room was completely silent. High Commander Veth stood up. His aide stood up beside him. He said, "Korax will not be issuing a formal challenge. I have denied his request." Colonel Hartley blinked. "You denied it?" High Commander Veth looked at Hartley with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite respect, but something that existed in the space between them. He said, "Korax touched her first. In Dreth law, she had the right to respond. What she did was not an attack. It was a correction. Korax was corrected. The matter is closed." He walked to the door. Then he stopped. Without turning around, he said one more thing. He said, "Tell your sergeant that High Commander Veth sends his regards." Then he left. The three humans sat in silence for a long moment after the door closed. Then Colonel Hartley said, very quietly, "What just happened?" Dr. Chen said, "I think we just won something. I'm not entirely sure what." General Webb said nothing. He was looking at the door. His expression, for the first time in 30 years of military service, was something very close to a smile. Elena did not know any of this was happening. She was in her quarters on the base. She had cleaned the cut on her cheekbone, which was small and would heal without stitches. She had changed out of her civilian clothes. She had made herself a cup of tea, which she drank sitting on the edge of her bed, looking at nothing in particular. She was not thinking about what had happened in the square. Not in the way most people would think about it. She was not replaying it. She was not feeling proud or scared or excited. She was doing what she always did after a physical confrontation, which was to run through it technically, the way a mechanic runs through an engine, checking each part, identifying what worked and what could have been better. The entry had been good. The leverage had been correct. The control position had been solid. The exit had been clean. She noted one thing she would have done differently. When she had moved to close the distance, she had been slightly more visible than she would have liked. A more experienced opponent might have seen it coming. She filed that away. She would work on it. That was all. She finished her tea. She picked up her book about the Roman legions. She read for 40 minutes. Then she went to sleep. She slept well. She always slept well. At 6 the next morning, there was a knock on her door. It was a young corporal named Davis, who looked like he had not slept at all, and was trying very hard not to show how nervous he was. He said, "Sergeant Vasquez, Colonel Hartley wants to see you. Right now." Elena said, "Give me 5 minutes." She dressed. She pulled her hair back. She checked the cut on her cheekbone in the mirror. It was already closing. She would have a small scar. She had others. One more did not matter. She went to see Colonel Hartley. Hartley's office was on the 3rd floor of the main building. It had a window that looked out over the base's central courtyard, where a group of Vorkai scientists were setting up some kind of equipment that Elena did not recognize. She watched them for a moment while Hartley finished reading something on his screen. Then Hartley looked up. He said, "Sit down, Vasquez." She sat. He said, "You know why you're here." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Walk me through it." She walked him through it. Exactly as it had happened. No embellishment. No emotion. Just the sequence of events. Precise and clear. The way she would describe any tactical situation. Hartley listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know this is all over the internet." She said, "I assumed it would be, sir." He said, 40 million views as of this morning. Probably more by now. She said nothing. He said, "The Dreth High Commander held a meeting with General Webb last night." Do you know what came out of that meeting? She said, No, sir. He told her. All of it. The challenge request, the denial, the 12 beings in the galaxy. The regards. Elena listened. Her expression did not change. But something shifted very slightly in her eyes. Something that was not quite surprise and not quite satisfaction. Something quieter than both. When Hartley finished, she said, What happens now, sir? Hartley said, That's what I'm trying to figure out. He leaned back in his chair. Officially, you acted outside your capacity as a Marine. You were off duty. You were in civilian clothes. You were not authorized to engage with an alien national. He paused. Unofficially, he said, You may have just done more for human-alien relations than 3 years of diplomatic meetings. Elena said, I didn't do it for human-alien relations, sir. Hartley said, I know. Why did you do it? She thought about it for a moment. Not because she did not know the answer. Because she wanted to say it correctly. She said, He touched me. He didn't have the right to touch me. So I corrected it. Hartley looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, dismissed, Vasquez. Stay on base today. I'll let you know when I know more. She stood. She moved to the door. Then Hartley said, One more thing. She stopped. He said, High Commander Veth said you acted with complete precision and complete control. He said he's met 12 beings in the galaxy who could do what you did. He paused. I've been in the military for 28 years, he said. I've met maybe 3. Elena said nothing. She nodded once. Then she left. The story should have ended there. It did not end there. 3 days after the incident in the square, something happened that nobody had predicted. Something that changed the entire situation in a way that nobody in the diplomatic meetings, nobody in the military briefings, nobody watching the footage online had seen coming. Corax requested a meeting with Elena. Not a challenge. Not a confrontation. A meeting. The request came through official channels, which was itself unusual. Dreth warriors did not typically use official channels for personal matters. They handled personal matters personally. The fact that Corax had gone through the formal diplomatic process meant something. Dr. Chen said it meant he was being careful. General Webb said it meant he was being watched by his own people. Colonel Hartley said it meant he was either very smart or very dangerous, and possibly both. Elena said she would meet him. Hartley tried to talk her out of it. She listened to his arguments. They were reasonable arguments. She acknowledged that they were reasonable. Then she said she would meet him anyway. The meeting was arranged for a neutral location, a small conference room on the ground floor of the coordination base, with 2 human observers and 1 Vorkai observer present. Corax arrived alone. Elena arrived alone. They sat across from each other at a small table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Corax spoke. In Dreth. The Vorkai observer translated. He said, I came to understand what happened. Elena said, What part of it? He said, All of it. But specifically, I want to understand how you did what you did. I want to understand the mechanics of it. Elena looked at him. She was trying to read his expression, which was difficult. Dreth faces were not built for the kind of micro-expressions that humans use to communicate emotion. But she had been briefed on Dreth body language, and what she saw in the way he held himself, the angle of his shoulders, the position of his hands, was not aggression. It was something she recognized from a completely different context. It was the look of a student. She said, You want me to explain how I put you on the ground? He said yes. She said, Why? He said, Because in 600 years of Dreth military history, it has never happened. Because I need to understand it. Because if I do not understand it, I cannot learn from it. And if I cannot learn from it, I am weaker than I was before it happened. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, In my culture, we have a saying. We say that the most dangerous opponent is the one who knows what they don't know. The Vorkai observer translated. Corax listened. Something moved in his expression. He said, We have a similar saying. We say that the warrior who cannot be surprised cannot be defeated. But the warrior who believes they cannot be surprised has already been defeated. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Leverage. It was leverage. You're bigger than me. You're stronger than me. In a direct contest of strength, you win every time. So I didn't contest your strength. I redirected it. I used your own weight and momentum against you. I found the angle where your size became a disadvantage instead of an advantage." She paused. She said, "The bigger you are, the further you fall." Korax was very still. He said, "Show me." The two human observers looked at each other. The Vorkai observer looked at Elena. Everyone in the room was waiting to see what she would do. Elena stood up. She said, "Stand up." Korax stood up. For the next 40 minutes, in that small conference room, Elena Vasquez taught a Dreth warrior the principles of human close-quarters combat. Not the full system, not the years of training, just the principles, the concepts, the way of thinking about a fight that made size and strength secondary to position and leverage and timing. Korax was a fast learner. Faster than she expected. He asked precise questions. He listened to the answers. He tried the movements she demonstrated, slowly at first, then with more confidence. He made mistakes and he acknowledged them without embarrassment, which Elena found surprising, and then found herself respecting. At the end of the 40 minutes, Korax stood back and looked at her. He said, "Your people have been developing this for how long?" She said, "Thousands of years. Different systems, different cultures, different approaches. But the core principles are ancient." He said, "And every Marine learns this?" She said, "Every Marine learns the basics. Some go further." He said, "You went further." She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that the Vorkai observer translated very carefully, making sure the words were exact. He said, "I came to Earth believing that humans were the weakest species I had ever encountered. I believed this because of what I observed. Your size, your lifespan, your technology, which is primitive compared to ours, your history, which is short compared to ours." He paused. He said, "I was wrong. Not about the size or the lifespan or the technology. Those things are true. But I was wrong about what they meant. I was measuring the wrong things." Elena said, "What were you measuring?" He said, "Power. I was measuring power, but power is not the same as strength. Your people have something that I do not have a word for in Dreth. Something that makes you dangerous in a way that has nothing to do with size or technology." Elena waited. He said, "You refuse to accept the limits that reality tries to impose on you. Every other species I have encountered, when faced with a superior opponent, calculates the odds and responds accordingly. Your people do not calculate the odds. Your people look at a superior opponent and decide that the odds are wrong." He looked at her directly. He said, "That is not weakness. That is something I have never encountered before, and I do not know what to do with it." Elena looked back at him. She said, "Neither do we, most of the time." For the first time since she had met him, Korax made a sound that might, in a human, have been a laugh. 6 months passed. The world changed in ways that were small and large and impossible to fully track. The footage of the square had done something to the relationship between humans and aliens that 3 years of diplomatic meetings had not managed to do. It had made it real. It had made it human. It had taken the abstract concept of coexistence and turned it into something concrete and vivid, and impossible to ignore. Humans watched the footage and felt something shift in their chests. Something that had been uncertain became certain. Something that had been afraid became less afraid. Not because the aliens were less powerful. They were still more powerful. Their technology was still centuries ahead. Their military capability was still overwhelming. But the footage said something that no diplomatic statement had ever managed to say. It said, "We are here. We are real. And we will not be dismissed." The aliens watched the footage too. All 3 species. The Vorkai watched it with the careful, analytical attention they gave to everything, and they updated their models of human capability accordingly. The Sathani watched it and said nothing publicly, but their observers at the coordination bases began paying closer attention to human military training programs, and the Dreth watched it, and had conversations that humans were not privy to. Conversations that went on for weeks, in secure channels, at the highest levels of their military hierarchy. High Commander Veth watched the footage 17 times. His aide, Sorak, counted. Elena did not watch it at all. She had been promoted. Not because of the incident officially. Because of her service record, her performance evaluations, her scores, her leadership assessments, all of which were exceptional. The promotion had been in process before the incident in the square. The incident had not changed the timeline. But everyone knew. Everyone knew that the promotion board had looked at the footage. Everyone knew that the 12 beings in the galaxy comment had circulated through every level of the military command structure. Everyone knew that something had changed, quietly and permanently, in the way the institution thought about what it was training people to be. Elena was now Staff Sergeant Vasquez. She had a new assignment. She was part of a newly created unit, the Joint Species Coordination Force, which was a formal name for something that had never existed before. A unit made up of human military personnel and alien military personnel, working together, training together, learning from each other. Korax was in the unit. This had been his request, formally submitted, through official channels, to High Commander Veth, who had approved it after a long silence that his aide Sorak had found deeply unnerving. On the first day of the unit's training program, Elena and Korax stood in the same courtyard where the Vorkai scientists had been setting up their equipment 6 months ago. Around them were 23 other personnel, human and alien, looking at each other with varying degrees of uncertainty and curiosity and wariness. Elena looked at the group. She thought about what to say. She thought about the Roman legions, which had been built on the principle that discipline and training could overcome almost any disadvantage of size or number. She thought about the Edge program and its saying about enemies and windows and capability. She thought about Korax's words about refusing to accept the limits that reality tried to impose. She said, "My name is Staff Sergeant Vasquez. Most of you know why I'm here. Some of you think you know what that means. You don't. What happened 6 months ago was not a victory. It was a beginning. A beginning of understanding something that none of our species has fully understood yet." She paused. She said, "We are going to spend the next 6 months making each other better, not by pretending our differences don't exist, by understanding them, by learning from them, by finding out what each of us knows that the others don't." She looked at Korax. He looked back at her. She said, "The galaxy is large. It is old. And it is full of things that none of us have encountered yet. When we meet those things, we will be stronger together than we are apart. That is not a feeling. That is a tactical reality." She said, "Let's get to work." And they did. But here is the part that nobody knew. The part that was not in the footage. The part that was not in the diplomatic reports, or the military briefings, or the news coverage. On the evening of the first day of training, after everyone else had gone, Korax stayed in the courtyard. He was sitting on a bench near the wall, looking up at the sky. The London sky was gray, as always, heavy and low. But through a gap in the clouds, a few stars were visible. Elena came back for something she had left. She saw him sitting there. She almost kept walking. Then she stopped. She sat down on the bench beside him, not close, just nearby. They sat in silence for a while. Then Korax said, "Do you know what my people call Earth?" She said no. He said, "We call it the quiet world. Because when we first detected it, it was so quiet. No signals, no transmissions, no evidence of anything beyond the most primitive technology. We almost did not come here at all. We almost decided it was not worth the journey." He paused. He said, "I think about that sometimes. How close we came to never knowing you existed." Elena looked up at the gap in the clouds. At the stars. She said, "We almost didn't know you existed either. For most of our history, we looked up at those stars and wondered if we were alone. Most people thought we probably were." He said, "Were you afraid when you found out you were not alone?" She thought about it honestly. She said, Some people were. A lot of people were. But some people were something else. He said, "What?" She said, "Ready." Korax was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes. I think that is the word I was looking for, the word I did not have in Dreth." He looked at her. He said, "Ready." Elena nodded. She stood up. She picked up what she had come back for. She looked at Korax one more time. She said, "Same time tomorrow, Commander." He said, "Same time tomorrow, Sergeant." She walked away. Above them, through the gap in the clouds, the stars were very bright and very far away, and full of things that neither of them had encountered yet. But they would. And when they did, they would be ready. Here is the thing that nobody talks about. The incident in the square, the 3 seconds, the footage, the 40 million views, all of it, it was not the most important thing that happened that day. The most important thing that happened that day was what Korax did afterward. Because Korax went back to his quarters that evening and he wrote a report. A full military report, submitted through official Dreth channels, to High Commander Veth, and through Veth to the Dreth High Command. And in that report, Korax did something that no Dreth warrior had done in 600 years of recorded military history. He recommended that the Dreth military begin a formal study of human close-quarters combat techniques. Not as a curiosity, not as an academic exercise, as a genuine military priority. He wrote that human beings had developed, over thousands of years of conflict with each other, a body of knowledge about combat that was unlike anything in the Dreth military tradition. He wrote that this knowledge was not based on strength or size or technology. It was based on something more fundamental, something that the Dreth, in their centuries of conquest, had never needed to develop because they had always been the strongest thing in the room. He wrote that humans had learned to fight as if they were always the smallest thing in the room, because for most of their history they were. He wrote that this made them dangerous in a way that the Dreth had no framework for understanding, and that this was a problem, not because humans were enemies, but because the galaxy was large and old and full of things that even the Dreth had not encountered yet. And when those things were encountered, the Dreth would want humans beside them, not because humans were powerful, because humans were ready. High Commander Veth read the report 3 times. Then he approved it. Then he did something that his aide Sorak found even more surprising than the approval. He added a personal note to the report, a note that went to the highest levels of Dreth command, a note that said, in the formal language of Dreth military correspondence, that in 30 years of service he had encountered perhaps 12 beings in the entire galaxy who possessed what the humans called readiness, and that in his assessment, the human species as a whole possessed it in a way that no individual being could. He wrote that this was not a threat. He wrote that it was a gift. And he wrote that the Dreth, if they were wise, would treat it as such. That note changed things, not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, in the way that real change always happens, quietly and permanently, and in ways that are only visible in retrospect. The Joint Species Coordination Force grew, from 25 personnel to 200, from 1 location to 7, from 1 species pairing to all 3, Vorkai scientists working alongside human engineers, Sethani observers embedded with human intelligence units, Dreth warriors training with marine combat specialists. And at the center of all of it, steady and quiet and precise, was Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, who had started all of this by walking through a public square on her day off, thinking about calling her mother and what to have for dinner, and a book about the Roman legions, who had been slapped by a 7-foot alien warrior, who had reset, who had ended it in 3 seconds, who had said 4 words and walked away. The galaxy, it turned out, had been watching. Not just the Dreth, not just the 3 species on Earth, others. Species that had not yet made contact. Species that monitored the quiet worlds from a distance, waiting to see what they would become before deciding whether to approach. They had been watching Earth for a long time. After the square, they watched more closely, because what they saw in those 3 seconds was not just a Marine defeating a Dreth warrior. What they saw was something rarer and more significant. They saw a species that had been told, implicitly and explicitly, by the mere existence of beings more powerful than themselves, that they were small and weak and irrelevant. And they saw that species look at that message and decide it was wrong. Not with anger, not with desperation, with the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who has trained for thousands of hours and knows exactly what they are capable of. If this opened your eyes to what human beings truly are, to what we have always been, to what we carry in our bones from 10,000 years of refusing to accept the limits that the world tried to put on us, then you already know what comes next. The story does not end in that courtyard. It does not end with Elena and Korax looking at the stars. It ends somewhere out there, in the dark between the stars, where something is waiting that neither of them has encountered yet. And when they find it, they will be ready. Let's bring it all together. Today you witnessed something extraordinary. A single human being, off-duty, unarmed, and outnumbered by size and strength, changed the course of human alien history in 3 seconds. Not because she was superhuman, because she was prepared. Because she had trained past every limit she thought she had. Because when the moment came, she did not hesitate. You saw how one act of quiet, precise courage did more for humanity's place in the galaxy than years of diplomatic meetings. You saw how a Dreth warrior, from a civilization built entirely on strength, recognized something in a human marine that he had no word for. And you saw how that recognition became the foundation of something new, something that neither species could have built alone. And you saw the final truth that the footage never showed. That the most important thing Elena Vasquez did that day was not the 3 seconds in the square. It was the 40 minutes in the conference room afterward, when she sat across from the being who had struck her and chose to teach instead of to hate. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done. We get knocked down. We reset. And then we figure out how to make the situation better than it was before. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real about what human beings are capable of, do one thing right now. Hit that subscribe button. Join the Hate-Fi Sci-Fi community. Because we have more stories like this one. Stories about humans who refuse to accept the limits. Stories about the moments when our species showed the galaxy exactly who we are. And if you want to go deeper, watch our next video, where we explore another incredible Hate-Fi story about a human crew stranded in alien territory, with no weapons, no backup, and no way home. What they do next will leave you speechless. Drop a comment below and tell us this. If you were Elena Vasquez in that square, what would you have done? Would you have walked away? Would you have responded? And what do you think those 3 seconds meant for humanity's future in the galaxy? We read every comment. We want to know what you think. This is Hate-Fi Sci-Fi. Humanity. Always ready, never finished. We will see you in the next one.